I got an unexpected call from my father on Wednesday of this week. Called me like 4 times during Bible study. Thought, okay, what's up, right? You have to know my dad, he's a bit impatient. So what's up? I called him up, said, you were calling? I said, yeah. He said, you know what today is? It's not his birthday, it's not Mom's birthday, it's not their anniversary, it's not my birthday. No, I don't know what today is. He said, well, today is the 46th anniversary of our family's immigration to Canada. October 17th is the day that we immigrated to Canada 46 years ago. I had no idea. Yeah, I suppose the date meant more to my mom and dad, who were in their mid-30s, right, when they immigrated, than to me, who I was 7 years old. But as we get older, these sorts of things take on more meaning. I remember way back when, during the year that I spent in Korea while I was a seminary student, so between the 2nd and 3rd years of seminary, I went back to Korea and spent a year in Korea. It was a good year. I ended up meeting Sophie. But during that time, I had the chance to travel from the capital city, which is Seoul, down to my hometown. And I was born in a city called Daegu, which is a smaller city in the southern part of Korea. It's an ugly city. I have to be honest, you know, it's not a very attractive city. It's sort of hot and dusty. It's landlocked. It has no real body of water. There's no big lake or ocean. You know, it's just a hot, dry, dusty city. Not really much to look at. So anyway, I had some time to myself because I still have relatives living there, and I had some time to myself. So I thought, you know what I'll do? I'll take a taxi to the neighborhood in which I grew up. Now, I was told before that the house in which I was born in a house and not in a hospital, that the house that I was born had been rezoned or redeveloped, and it was a big shopping center, right? So be it. But the school I went to school for a year before I came here. So the school that I went to was still standing. And I have these memories of what this school would look like. It was a bit of an L-shaped building, and there was a compound in the center of it, all dirt, there's no grass, and then there was some exercise equipment off to the side here. So I just remember being there, and so I got into a taxi, and I said to the taxi driver, I'd like to go to this area of the city. And he looked at me, and he was surprised, and he said, well, what do you want to go there for? You don't look like the kind of guy that would come from that part of the city. And I said, well, I'm actually visiting, I'm actually from Canada, but this is where I grew up, and I just wanted to go see the school again. And he said, you know, I only probably go into that part of the city a couple of times a year. It's just not a great part of the city. But he drove me there through these twisting, narrow, unnamed streets until we came upon the gates to the school. And I got out, and it was like time had stood still. It had been almost 20 years since I'd left Korea, but as I looked at this school, almost nothing had changed. I still remember, you know, I can still picture myself in the classrooms fighting. Had a little, we used to use little portable razors, collapsible razors to sharpen our pencils, and I had one collapse right on my finger. And I still have the scar from it, all the blood rushing out. Nothing seems to have changed. The same 2 buildings were there, the same dirt field where I remember lining up and putting our hands, you know, like this, and checking our fingernails, all that stuff. I remembered it all. The same playground off to the corner of the field. Almost 20 years, and nothing had changed. So I walked around the neighborhood. There were these tiny streets with these small shops with the, you know, they got the closing steel doors, and some of them were open, and you could see inside. They had these little machines. They're for machinists, and that's what my dad did. He was a machinist. And so the same sort of shops were still there that had been there when we lived in Korea. My dad had been working as a machinist in one of these small shops, but you know, they had a dream, and when the opportunity came, they seized that dream and said, we're going to go somewhere else, and we're going to seek a different life. They had a dream for their family that would take them out of the dusty, cramped streets of the city into a brave new land where their children might have the opportunity to know a different kind of life. And so my parents, they borrowed money. They had zero. we were actually in debt when we arrived in Calgary. Each of us had like one suitcase. There was nothing to be shipped later. It was some debt that we had borrowed money for the airline tickets, and then some clothing. Our family immigrated to Canada. If you're familiar with the CBC show Kim's Convenience, well, who do you think they named it after, right? It wasn't a glamorous life, but my brother and I, we knew a very different life because of the dreams of my parents. Now, Sophie and I, as parents, we have a dream for our kids as well. You know, it's probably a similar dream, if not the same dream, that all parents have for their kids, right? We want them to do better than we've done. We want our children to know a better life than we know, to have better opportunities, to have a better education, a better lifestyle than the ones we know. And I think the only issue with our dreams here is that in the comfortable situation, in the already comfortable situation that we find ourselves in, our dreams tend to go far beyond the dreams of people who are just struggling for a way out of poverty. You think about that caravan of people coming up from Guatemala and Honduras, stuck at the border of Mexico. What are their dreams like? Are their dreams anything close to our dreams, right? Our dreams tend to go far beyond a way out of poverty, a way towards dignity, a way for opportunity. And our dreams, let's be honest, tend to be centered more on having more than what we already have. More than what most of the world would already find to be very comfortable. Maybe our dreams move on to what people might consider to be extravagant, or excessive, or even extreme. I'm not just talking about money or resources. I'm talking about dreams of position or privilege, dreams of power, dreams of respect, dreams of greatness, visions of grandeur. James and John, two of the disciples of Jesus, know something about dreams. This morning's gospel, we read that James and John, the sons of Zebedee, two disciples of Jesus, approached Jesus with a request that lays bare their utter incomprehension of who their master Jesus was and what his purpose on earth was. Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask. I don't know if that's just the translation of the text, but that question, that request sounds so downright childish, right? It's like something my kids would ask when they were younger. Dad, I want you to do whatever I want, whatever I ask of you. Right? Like, and you know, as a parent, you're like, no way. No way would I say yes to that. What is it that you want before I answer that question? Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask. The Greek is literally translated as, Teacher, we wish that whatever we may ask you, you may do for us. Like, no matter how you spin it, this is a brash and I think rude request. Right? You go up to Jesus and say, do whatever we ask. Right? It's a rude request. Well, what do you want me to do for you, says Jesus. Let one of us sit at your right and the other sit at your left in your glory. Well, at least they don't care which one gets to sit at the right hand and which one gets to sit at the left, as long as the two sons of Zebedee can have these honored places right next to Jesus. And Jesus says, you don't know what you're asking. You don't know what you're talking about. They haven't caught on to what Jesus is all about. The disciples are still thinking that by following Jesus, they are on the road to upward mobility, right? He's a star, and we're going to hitch our wagon to the star. We're on the road to upward mobility. That's what their thinking betrays, isn't it? That by being with Jesus, by following Jesus, by being his disciples, that they might share a little of the glory, that something of Jesus might rub off on them. Now, when the other disciples, the other 10, hear of the request of James and John, well, they're furious, right? They're furious, they're indignant. And you kind of wonder, what are they mad about? What are they mad about? That James and John would have dared to ask Jesus for the places on his right and his left? Or are they mad that we should have asked this first? How dare they seek to get advantage when we should get it first? I want you to take a look at the Last Supper. by Da Vinci. You all know this painting. Guess who's seated at the right and left of Jesus? See that disciple on Jesus' right? That's John. And the one on his left, not the one with the finger up, okay? But the one that's sitting there with his arms like this, that's James. So there they are, James and John, seated at the right and the left hand of Jesus. Maybe Da Vinci had this in mind when he painted that picture. Of course, it's just a picture, but I'm just saying. Upward mobility, visions of grandeur. You know, it drives so many of our dreams. It probably drives your dreams as well as mine. And it drives the disciples in their ignorance of who Jesus really was. Now, our text from John's Gospel, 10th chapter, immediately follows Jesus' third declaration in the Gospel about the suffering and the betrayal that the Son of Man, that he would have to endure. 3 times in the Gospel of Mark, Jesus speaks the truth about his death. And after each of these events, the disciples demonstrate their complete inability to understand what Jesus is saying. After the first declaration, Peter rebukes Jesus. Right? Jesus says, I have to face death and suffering. And Peter says, don't talk about nonsense like that. Right? And that's when Jesus says, get behind me, Satan. Peter rebukes Jesus. After the second declaration that Jesus talked about his death, Jesus caught the disciples arguing amongst themselves. And he said, what were you guys arguing about? Nobody really wanted to say. But he said, tell me, what were you guys arguing about? Well, we were arguing about who among us would be the greatest. And now, here after Jesus' third declaration of his impending suffering and death, the disciples are arguing once again about who ought to sit in the places of honor, at the right and the left of Jesus. They don't get it. They just don't get it. Peter couldn't fathom why Jesus, who he had just proclaimed to be the Messiah, right? Why would Jesus, the Messiah, speak of suffering and dying? The rest of the disciples clearly don't understand either, because when Jesus speaks of sacrifice and suffering, they're all caught up in how their association with Jesus might lead to their enhancement. Right? Upward mobility by rubbing shoulders with the Messiah. So Jesus calls the disciples together. He's heard their feuding. He's listened to them arguing about who was greater, who should sit where, and Jesus takes the time to set the record straight. You know, those who are regarded as rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them. But not so with you. Not so with you, he says. You're not the same as them. You're my disciples, you're not the same as them. You're to be different. My disciples don't follow the rules of upward mobility, says Jesus. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant. And whoever wants to be first must be slave of all. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. My followers, says Jesus, my followers are not about upward mobility. If you want to be my disciples, you must be the servant of all, and just as I have given my life as a ransom for many. You know, the dreams of those who would want to follow Jesus, the dreams of those who wish to be disciples of Jesus, must be predicated not on visions of upward mobility, but on the call to a downward mobility. Call to a downward mobility. In this upside-down kingdom of Jesus, it is the least who are the greatest. It is the last who are first. You know, it's a message for the disciples of Jesus today. It's a message for us. Not only as individuals, but it's also a message for us as a church. It's a message to the church today. What is our dream? What is our dream? What do we think is God's dream for us as members and adherents of Richmond Presbyterian Church? What's our dream? What is your dream for this congregation? You know, I think too often the church measures success in much the same way as our world measures it. If I asked you, how do you know if a church is successful? How do you know if a church is successful? how would we define that? Don't we measure success for churches in the same way that the world tends to measure? How big is it? How many people go to your church? How much money does your church have? What does their building look like? How many programs do they have? You know, we're governed by this desire for church growth, believing that the most important determination of our success is how big we are. It's the case with many Christians, and as Presbyterians, we're not exempt from this, and as Presbyterians, we might be even more susceptible because we know we're part of a denomination that is struggling. And we look towards these other churches that are doing really well. Big churches, lots of people. And we wish that we could somehow emulate their success. You see the church down the street here, Temple Street? Big church, lots of people. Do you ever ask yourself, how could we get that many people here? Is that the question we should be asking? Is that the measure by which we are determining our success? Don't many of us long for a return to the glory days when all of our sanctuaries in our Presbyterian churches were full and society was in lockstep with religion? And I would say probably a lot of ministers are no different than a lot of our people in the pews. Right? I mean, we're tempted by visions of upward mobility as well. We want to move from small congregations to big ones. We all want to end up in the big high steeple church, getting influence, recognition, authority, and praise. And Jesus says, stop it. Stop. Jesus says, stop. Not so with you. Not so with you. Not so with you, he says to the church. Not so with you, he says to us. Right? No. We're not like the rest of the world. We're different. We are disciples of a Lord who didn't come to be served, who could have said, hey, wash my feet. We're disciples of a Lord who said, I'm going to serve you. I'm going to serve you. I'm going to give my life for you. Success as disciples of Jesus, success as communities of faith, success for the church cannot be measured by upward mobility indicators. Can't be measured by how full our pews are, or how big our budget is, or how vast our programs are, how influential our church is. Because we know all too well, don't we, how quickly all of those things can come crashing down. Success for the church can only truly be measured by the same standard that was used by our Lord and our King. Success for the church can only truly be measured by the willingness of our members and adherents to embrace the call to a downward mobility. Success for the church will be measured by how willing we as a church are to serve and to be the servant of all. Richmond Presbyterian Church, friends, our success in God's eyes will be measured not by how large we are, how full the sanctuary gets, not by how much money gets put into the offering plate, not by how influential or how other people think of us, the recognition or the reception that we might have, not by our reputation. Our success in God's eyes will be measured by how we care for the least of God's children. Our success will be measured by how we care for the least of God's children. Greatness, according to the world, is hierarchical, right? The higher you get, the closer you get to the top, the fewer there are. It's like a pyramid. The closer we get to God, the fewer we are. But that's not God's definition of greatness. That's not God's definition of greatness. In God's upside-down kingdom, you take that pyramid and you turn it upside down. And it's at the bottom of this pyramid that the numbers get smaller and smaller and smaller. And at the very, very bottom of that pyramid is a cross. And there's only one. There's only one. Henry Nouwen writes, the way of the Christian is not the way of upward mobility in which the world has invested so much, but the way of downward mobility ending on the cross. It is not to be an example of power and control, but of powerlessness and humility, in which the suffering servant of God, Jesus Christ, is made manifest. We all have dreams. We all have dreams. We have dreams for this congregation of God's people. We have dreams of greatness and success. Jesus tells us that the success of Richmond Presbyterian Church will be measured by how willing each one of us is in making ourselves available to others in the same way that Jesus made himself available to us. The way to greatness for the community of Christ followers is not only to rearrange what we value and desire, but it's also truly to rid ourselves of those things that are unnecessary and unwelcome in the kingdom of God. It's to rid ourselves of the assumptions of power and authority. Let's reformulate our dreams of success. Let's be a people, a community, a church which understands that the only way to get up is to first get on our knees. Right? The only way for us to get up is to get on our knees. That the way of God always leads through the cross. The way of God always leads through the cross. Wouldn't it be great if when we start talking to people about churches, which church do you go to? I go to Richmond Church. And the first question they ask us isn't, well, how many people go there? It's, what does your church do for the community? Wouldn't it be great if that's the question we asked of other people? Which church do you go to? Well, I go to the church somewhere in Vancouver. Tell me about your church. What does your church do for your community? How does it serve the people? Rather than, how many people go there? What does your building look like? Wouldn't it be great? You know, James and John, they had one thing right. They knew where true greatness lay, right? They knew where true greatness lay. They knew that it lay in Jesus. They knew that if they stuck close to him, that they would get this glimpse of glory. What they didn't know, at least at that time, was that Jesus' greatness lay in his willingness to lay himself down, to give himself for the sake of humanity, that his glory was to be found on the agony and the pain of the cross. I have a dream about us here on 2 Road next to Granville. I have a vision for church growth, but it doesn't involve just filling the pews with people, with more people. It's a dream that every person, every one of us, every one of you, myself, every person who calls Richmond Church their home will be a servant to at least one other person in their lives. My dream is that each one of us will serve someone in your life. You know, I checked the election results. For some strange reason, Richmond's election results to the province weren't fully made official till about 3 o'clock in the morning. I checked them anyway. I think there's a total of two different councillors, right? But the mayor's the same, and 6 out of the 8 councillors are the same. On this post-election day, let's be honest, it is not our elected officials that will determine the kind of community that we're going to be. It is not our elected officials that are going to determine the kind of community that Richmond will be. It will be us. It will be us. We need to have a clear and focused dream and vision for this community that we all call home. This place where God has planted this church, where God has placed us together. A dream of a community where everyone belongs, where all are welcomed, valued, and loved. We have to have a clear dream, a clear vision of that. You know, God has a dream for us to be a people who will follow the ways of Jesus and the ways of his upside-down kingdom, where the last will be first and the least will be greatest. Friends, will we be a church? Will we be a church that will realize God's dreams for us? If so, let's cast aside all that would weigh us down. Let's cast that aside, and let's follow the way of the one who did not come to us to be served, but who came to us to serve and to give his life for all of us. Thanks be to God. Amen. There's a change in our view.